My name is Ana Sofia Vega. I'm 32 years old, and I work at one of the most important tech companies in the country. Or should I say, I run one of the most important tech companies in the country, though my sister-in-law Victoria still doesn't know that. And the moment she finds out, well, let's just say it's going to be the most satisfying dinner party of my entire life. Hey everyone, before we dive into this incredible story of karma and justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you're not going to want to miss what happens when someone who's spent years looking down on you suddenly realizes you're the one holding all the power. Trust me, this is a story about underestimation, revenge, and the sweetest vindication you've ever heard. It all started 5 years ago when I married Daniel. I come from a humble family. My father was a mechanic and my mother a seamstress. I studied systems engineering thanks to a full scholarship, graduating with honors. I worked my way up from nothing, staying late nights in computer labs, living on instant noodles and determination, proving that talent and hard work could overcome any lack of connections or family money. Daniel's family, on the other hand, always boasted about their distinguished lineage and social connections. They were old money, the kind of people who measured worth by last names and country club memberships rather than character or achievement. Victoria, Daniel's older sister, married Eduardo Montero, who at the time was vice president of Tech Global, the very company where I worked as a developer. From day one, Victoria treated me like I was beneath her, like I was some kind of charity case her brother had foolishly taken pity on. "A programmer," she'd said when we first met, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, darling, isn't that just like being a secretary with computer knowledge?" That was her opening line to me. Not congratulations on the marriage. Not welcome to the family, just immediate judgment and dismissal. Daniel always tried to mediate, bless his heart. "Vicky, Ana is brilliant at her work. You should see the projects she develops." He tried to defend me, to make his sister see my value, but it was like talking to a wall made of designer handbags and inherited privilege. "Please, Daniel," Victoria would respond with disdain, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Anyone can write code all day. It's not like the important work my Eduardo does running the company." She'd emphasize the words important work, as if my contributions were equivalent to filing papers or making coffee. What Victoria didn't know, what nobody except the CEO and my immediate team knew, was that I had been secretly leading the development of a revolutionary artificial intelligence system that would transform the entire industry. My team worked directly with the CEO, bypassing Eduardo's supervision entirely. Why? Because Eduardo was notorious for taking credit for other people's work, for slapping his name on innovations he had nothing to do with, and then strutting around like he'd invented the internet itself. For years, I endured Victoria's contemptuous comments at every family gathering. "Anna, dear, could you serve more wine?" It's what a good service girl would do. She'd say this with a smile, as if she were making a joke rather than delivering an insult. "Oh, look at your clothes. I suppose it's the best you can afford on your salary." She touched the fabric of my dress like it might contaminate her. "Eduardo says programmers are replaceable. You should consider something more stable, like being his assistant." The implication was clear. I should be grateful for whatever scraps of employment her husband might toss my way. Daniel would get angrier with each comment, his jaw clenching, his hands balling into fists under the table. But I'd ask him to stay calm, to not make a scene. "Let them think what they want," I'd tell him, squeezing his hand under the table. "Time will put everything in its place." And oh, was time about to deliver in the most spectacular way possible. I'd been playing the long game, letting Victoria build her tower of arrogance higher and higher, knowing that the fall would be that much more devastating. A week ago, the CEO called me into his office. Santiago Mendez was a self-made man who'd built Tech Global from a garage startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. He valued results over pedigree, innovation over connections. "Anna," he said, his face breaking into a rare smile, "you've exceeded every expectation. The system you developed won't just revolutionize the industry, it's already brought in investments worth millions. The board of directors has made a unanimous decision." He handed me an envelope, and my hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was my appointment as the new global director of operations, a position 3 levels above Eduardo. 3 levels. That meant I wasn't just his colleague or his equal. I was his boss. His boss's boss, actually. The announcement would be made at the company's annual dinner, which coincidentally fell on the same night as the monthly family dinner Victoria organized. By the way, the CEO added, his expression turning serious, we also need to make some changes in the vice presidency team. Eduardo Montero has been making some questionable decisions. Very questionable. The weight of those words hung in the air between us. I smiled as I tucked the documents into my purse. Victoria had organized this month's family dinner specifically to brag about Eduardo's imminent promotion. She'd been boasting for weeks about how her husband would be the next director of operations, the very position that was actually mine. It will be a very special dinner, she'd announced to the family with her characteristic smugness. Only for the family elite. The way she said elite, while looking directly at me, made it clear I was only invited as a curiosity, a reminder of what happens when someone from the lower classes marries into a distinguished family. What Victoria didn't know was that this dinner really would be special, just not for the reasons she imagined. That evening, as I got ready for the dinner, Daniel watched me with a knowing smile. He was the only one who knew about my promotion, the only one I trusted with this delicious secret. "Ready for the show?" he asked, helping me with my necklace. His fingers lingered on my shoulders, and I could feel his excitement matching my own. "More than ready," I responded, touching the envelope in my purse like it was a talisman. "Do you think Victoria will enjoy having a maid as her dear Eduardo's boss?" The irony was too perfect. Daniel laughed, that deep, genuine laugh I'd fallen in love with years ago. I almost feel bad for her. Almost. What would happen at that dinner would forever change the family dynamics, and Victoria was about to learn a valuable lesson about judging people by their origins. Victoria's mansion glowed with elegant lights when we arrived. Her domestic staff rushed back and forth, preparing what she called a dinner worthy of executives. Everything was staged for maximum effect, the finest china, crystal glasses that probably cost more than my first car, flower arrangements that could have fed a family for a week. "Anna, darling," Victoria greeted me with her fake smile, the one that never reached her cold eyes. "The service staff enters through the back door." She said it loud enough for several arriving guests to hear, establishing the hierarchy from the moment we arrived. "Victoria," Daniel began to protest, his face flushing with anger, but I gently squeezed his hand. "Don't worry, honey," I responded with a serene smile, my voice sweet as honey. "Your sister has always had trouble distinguishing between doors and between people." Victoria's eyes narrowed at my comment. She knew I'd just insulted her, but couldn't quite figure out how to respond without looking petty in front of her other guests. The house gradually filled with extended family and some tech global executives, all carefully selected by Victoria to witness Eduardo's grand moment. I could see her working the room, touching elbows, whispering in ears, making sure everyone knew that tonight would be the night her husband ascended to his rightful place at the top of the corporate ladder. I sat strategically across from Eduardo, who seemed unusually nervous. He kept checking his phone obsessively and loosening his tie like it was strangling him. Something was wrong in his world, and he knew it. He just didn't know how wrong it was about to get. "Eduardo, darling," Victoria called as they served the appetizer, her voice carrying across the table. "Why don't you tell everyone about your big news?" Eduardo cleared his throat uncomfortably, his eyes darting around the table like a trapped animal. Maybe we should wait." "Nonsense," Victoria interrupted, standing up with her wine glass raised high. "Everyone is here to celebrate your promotion to Director of Operations. This is the perfect moment." I took a sip of wine to hide my smile. At that exact moment, my phone vibrated. It was a message from the CEO, official announcement sent to entire company. "Congratulations, Director Vega." The timing was absolutely perfect. "You know what?" Victoria continued, raising her glass higher. "This proves that hard work and class always triumph. Not everyone can aspire to leadership positions. Some people are destined for more basic roles." Her gaze landed deliberately on me, her smile sharpening into something cruel. "Like red and coat all day, right, Victoria?" I responded calmly, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Exactly," she smiled with disdain, clearly pleased that I understood my place. "It's good that you know your place, Anna. In fact, I was wondering why we even invited the maid to our executive dinner. The silence that fell over the table was deafening. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel was about to stand up, his chair scraping against the floor, but I stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "You're right, Victoria," I said, smiling as I opened my purse. The moment had finally arrived, and I was going to savor every second. "Why invite the maid?" I paused for effect, enjoying the confused looks around the table. "Honey," I turned to Daniel, "shouldn't we show them the documents from my promotion?" Eduardo, who had been drinking wine, started coughing violently, wine spraying across his plate. He knew. Somehow, he already knew what was coming. "Promotion!" Victoria scoffed, her laugh sharp and mocking. "Did they promote you to head secretary?" The contempt in her voice was palpable, and I could see several guests looking away in embarrassment at her cruelty. "Not exactly," I responded, sliding the envelope across the table toward her. It glided across the polished wood surface, coming to rest directly in front of her wine glass. "Global Director of Operations at Tech Global." The official announcement just went out. Victoria's face went through every shade of red imaginable as she read the document, her perfectly manicured hands trembling. She read it once, then again, then a third time, as if the words might change if she stared at them long enough. Eduardo looked like he was about to faint, all the color draining from his face until he resembled a ghost. This must be a mistake," Victoria stammered, her voice cracking. For the first time in 5 years, I saw genuine emotion cross her face, shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that her entire worldview was crumbling. "A mistake?" A voice interrupted from the entrance. It was Tech Global's CEO, Santiago Mendez himself, looking distinguished in a tailored suit. The entire table turned to stare at him in astonishment. "I assure you there's no mistake whatsoever." Victoria stood up so quickly she nearly knocked over her wine glass, red liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Santiago, we didn't know you were coming." Her voice was pitched too high, panic evident in every syllable. "I couldn't miss this moment." The CEO smiled, walking further into the room with the confidence of a man who owned every space he entered. "After all, it's not every day we announce our new director of operations. Anna has revolutionized the company with her AI system. It's going to change everything about how we do business, how the entire industry does business." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of respect and partnership that wasn't lost on anyone in the room. But, Eduardo!" Victoria stuttered, looking desperately at her husband, who seemed to be trying to disappear into his chair. "Ah, yes," Santiago continued, his tone shifting to something colder, more businesslike. "Eduardo, we need to discuss some irregularities found in your reports. It appears you've been taking credit for projects that weren't yours." The room went deadly silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the expensive carpet. Eduardo sank deeper into his chair, his face now ashen. His hands gripped the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. "In fact," I added, pulling another folder from my purse, I'd come prepared with everything I needed. "I have here the original records of all the projects Eduardo claimed as his own over the past 2 years, including the AI system that my team developed." I laid the folder on the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence, each document a nail in Eduardo's professional coffin. Victoria looked at me with a mixture of horror and hatred, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking completely. You planned this," she hissed, her voice venomous. "No, Victoria," I responded calmly, my voice steady and clear. "You planned a dinner to brag about a promotion your husband didn't deserve and hadn't earned. I just came to have dinner with the family, as the maid you think I am. Everything else, that's just consequences catching up with actions." The rest of the evening was controlled chaos. Guests began leaving uncomfortably, making awkward excuses about early mornings and prior commitments. Victoria tried desperately to maintain her composure, her smile fixed and brittle like a mask about to shatter. Eduardo was called to an emergency meeting with the legal department for the following morning. As we prepared to leave, Victoria stopped me at the door, her hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. "This isn't over," she whispered, venom dripping from every word. Her perfectly applied makeup was smudged now, mascara creating dark shadows under her eyes. "Oh, Victoria," I responded softly, gently removing her hand from my arm. "It's barely beginning. By the way, the service door is over there, right?" I gestured toward the back of the house with a sweet smile. We left the mansion, leaving Victoria furious and Eduardo devastated. In the car, Daniel finally let out the laugh he'd been holding in all night. "Did you see their faces?" he laughed, tears forming in his eyes from the sheer joy of it. "That was even better than I imagined." "But Anna, what did you mean when you said it was barely beginning?" I glanced at him as I started the car, a knowing smile playing on my lips. "Well," I responded as we drove toward home, the mansion's lights fading in the rearview mirror, "let's just say that the audit of Eduardo's projects is just the tip of the iceberg." The morning after the dinner, the office was a hotbed of rumors and speculation. My new position as director of operations was only part of the story making the rounds. Emails about Eduardo's irregularities had leaked throughout the entire company, spreading like wildfire through every department. I settled into my new office, 3 floors above where Eduardo's office used to be. The view was spectacular, overlooking the entire city. Sophia, my new executive assistant, entered with a stack of folders. "The complete audit results, Mrs. Vega," she said, placing them on my desk. Each folder was meticulously organized, color-coded, devastating in its thoroughness. "And you have a visitor." Before I could ask who, Victoria burst in like a hurricane, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. It was obvious she hadn't slept, that she'd spent the entire night in a panic. "You!" she screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "You destroyed my family." "Good morning, Victoria," I responded calmly, not even looking up from the document I was reading. "Coffee? Or would you prefer the maid to bring you some tea?" The jab was deliberate, and it hit its mark. "This is your revenge," Victoria shrieked, pacing back and forth in front of my desk like a caged animal. "You always envied us, our position, our status, our connections." "Envied exactly what?" I interrupted, finally looking up and opening one of the folders. "The money Eduardo stole from other people's projects? Or perhaps the funds he diverted to your personal accounts?" Victoria went pale, all the blood draining from her face in an instant. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying the lie. "How strange," I continued, pulling out specific documents with highlighted sections. "Because I have here records of monthly transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. Curiously, they coincide with the dates of your famous shopping trips to New York and Paris." Each word was chosen carefully, precisely, like a surgeon making calculated incisions. That's private," Victoria stammered, backing up slightly. "Not when the money comes from corporate funds," I responded, pulling out more documents. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. "Did you know Eduardo has been embezzling money for years? Every successful project you bragged about at your dinners was actually stolen work from other employees. And you, Victoria, have been spending that stolen money on designer handbags and luxury vacations." At that moment, Daniel entered the office. As a corporate lawyer for another firm, he'd been helping me compile evidence for months, working late nights to build an airtight case. "Legal department is ready," he announced. "And the police are on their way." Victoria collapsed into a chair, all the fight going out of her at once. She looked small suddenly, diminished. "You can't do this. We're family." "Family," I responded, standing up and walking around my desk to face her directly. "Like when you called me a maid. Like when you humiliated every employee you considered inferior. Like when you and Eduardo destroyed careers to maintain your facade of superiority." Each question was an indictment, years of accumulated hurt finally finding its voice. "Please," Victoria begged, tears ruining her expensive makeup, mascara running down her cheeks in dark rivers. "Eduardo was just following orders. It was the higher executives." The desperation in her voice was almost pitying. "Almost." Yes," I interrupted, pressing the intercom button. "Sophia, could you bring in Mr. Mendez?" The CEO entered with 2 detectives, their badges glinting in the morning light. "Mrs. Montero," Santiago said formally, all traces of social politeness gone. "Your husband just confessed everything, including the fact that you were the mastermind behind the embezzlement scheme." The color drained from Victoria's face as the full weight of her situation hit her. She'd been so confident in her invulnerability, so certain that her social position would protect her from consequences. Victoria tried to run, stumbling toward the door in her designer heels, but the detectives were faster. As they handcuffed her, she screamed, "Anna, we're family. You can't let them arrest me." The irony of her appeal to family after years of treating me like hired help wasn't lost on anyone in the room. "You know, Victoria," I said, watching the handcuffs click into place, "you're right. We're family. And as family, I have a moral duty to make sure you face the consequences of your actions. It's what a good maid would do, don't you think?" The following months were intense, a whirlwind of court dates and legal proceedings. Eduardo was sentenced to 15 years in prison for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Victoria received 10 years for being an accomplice and for money laundering. The mansion, the luxury cars, all their possessions were confiscated and sold to pay restitution to the company and the employees whose work they'd stolen. The family elite, as Victoria used to call them, turned their backs on her completely. In high society, there's no faster fall than from grace to prison. At Tech Global, I implemented significant changes that went far beyond just punishing wrongdoing. I created a recognition program for employees at all levels, ensuring that each person's work was valued and properly rewarded. No more would talented developers see their innovations stolen by executives taking credit. No more would hard work go unrecognized while connected mediocrity rose to the top. The AI system I developed became an industry standard, and the company grew exponentially. We went from a successful tech company to a global leader, and we did it by valuing merit over pedigree. 1 year after that fateful dinner, I received a letter from prison. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable, Victoria's. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Anna," it began, "humility is a difficult lesson to learn, especially from a prison cell. I spent years looking down on people like you, without realizing I was the one at the bottom." The words were raw, unpolished, lacking the artificial elegance she'd always affected. "I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know I finally understand. A person's true worth isn't in their bank account or their last name, but in their integrity and honest work. I always mocked you for being a simple programmer, a maid. Now, while I clean the prison floors, I understand what honest work really means. Victoria!" I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer, next to a photo of my development team, a diverse group of brilliant people who now had the opportunity to shine on their own merits. Daniel entered my office with our 2-year-old daughter, Lucia, ready to go home. As I gathered my things, Lucia pointed to the photo on my desk, her tiny finger pressing against the glass. "Who are they, Mommy?" Her innocent question made me smile. "They're family, sweetheart," I responded, kneeling down to her level. "Real family. People who value each other for who they are, not what they have." On the way home, we drove past Victoria's former mansion, now converted into a technology innovation center for low-income youth. The building that had once been a symbol of exclusivity and elitism now opened its doors to kids who reminded me of myself at that age. Talented, hungry, lacking only opportunity. "You know," Daniel said, watching the building pass by, "I think in the end, Victoria gave you the best compliment possible." "Which one?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "She called you a maid, and she was right," he said with a smile. "You've served to change many people's lives. You've served justice, equality, meritocracy. That's something to be proud of." His words touched something deep inside me, reframing Victoria's insults into something meaningful. I smiled, thinking about how much everything had changed. Victoria had wanted to humiliate me by calling me a maid, never realizing that true leadership is, in essence, an act of service. Serving your team, your company, your community. Today, every time someone asks me how I became director of operations, I respond with a smile and the truth. I started as a simple programmer, or as my sister-in-law would say, a maid with computer knowledge. The story of the maid who became the boss became a legend at Tech Global, a reminder that respect isn't inherited with a last name but earned through work, integrity, and humility. People would point me out in the halls, not with the condescension Victoria had shown, but with genuine respect and admiration. New hires would hear the story during orientation, a company parable about the danger of underestimating people and the power of merit over privilege. As director of operations, I had the power to reshape the company's culture entirely. I established mentorship programs, pairing senior developers with promising newcomers, regardless of their educational background or family connections. I created a transparent promotion system where achievements were quantifiable and visible to everyone. No more backroom deals or nepotistic appointments. If you did good work, you advanced. It was revolutionary for the industry, and other companies started copying our model. The AI system I developed continued to evolve under my guidance. We expanded it beyond its original scope, creating applications that help small businesses compete with larger corporations, tools that democratize technology in ways that would have been impossible under Eduardo's leadership. Every success felt personal, a validation not just of my technical skills, but of my fundamental belief that talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. I made it a point to visit the innovation center that had been Victoria's mansion at least once a month. Walking through rooms where I'd once been insulted, now filled with eager young students coding their first programs, felt like closing a circle. Some of them reminded me so much of my younger self, that hunger to prove themselves, that chip on their shoulder born from being underestimated. I talked to them about my journey, never sugarcoating the difficulties, but always emphasizing that their background didn't define their future. "Did you really used to work for your sister-in-law's husband?" one student asked me during a visit, her eyes wide with the kind of awe that made me uncomfortable. "No," I corrected gently. "I never worked for Eduardo. I worked for the company, for the mission, for the innovation." That's an important distinction. We don't work for people, we work toward goals, toward visions, toward making things better. The company's annual gala that year was particularly meaningful. As I took the stage to present the Innovation Award, a new recognition I'd created for employees whose contributions had been previously overlooked, I spotted several familiar faces in the crowd. Former colleagues from my developer days, people who'd been in the trenches with me, who'd seen me dismissed and underestimated just as they had been. Now they were team leads, project managers, rising stars in their own right. 5 years ago, I began my speech, my voice carrying across the ballroom. Someone very close to me called me a maid with computer knowledge. At the time, I could have let that define me, could have let that small, cruel assessment become my reality. Instead, I let it motivate me. The room was silent, everyone leaning forward to hear. Because here's what I learned. When people try to make you small, they're revealing their own limitations, not yours. When they judge you by where you came from instead of where you're going, they're telling you they lack imagination and vision. I paused, looking out at the diverse crowd. People of all backgrounds, all ages, all walks of life, united by talent and passion. Tonight, we celebrate people who refused to be made small, who took the limitations others tried to impose on them and turned them into launching pads, who understood that the best revenge isn't getting even, it's succeeding beyond anyone's wildest expectations while staying true to your values. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most were the faces I saw in the crowd, people wiping away tears, people nodding in recognition of their own struggles, people whose stories paralleled mine in ways both large and small. This was what leadership meant. Not the corner office or the title, but the ability to create space for others to rise, to change the rules so that merit mattered more than pedigree. Daniel squeezed my hand as I left the stage, Lucia sleeping peacefully in his other arm. "That was beautiful," he whispered. "Your father would have been proud." My father, the mechanic who'd worked double shifts to help pay for my textbooks, who believed in me when I was just a kid with big dreams and no clear path. He'd passed away 2 years ago, but I felt his presence in moments like these. "He always said that honest work had its own dignity," I replied. I think he'd appreciate the irony of Victoria's insult becoming my mission statement. The final chapter of his story came full circle at another family dinner, this time organized by Daniel's mother, who'd been horrified by Victoria's behavior and had spent the past year rebuilding family relationships without her daughter's toxic influence. The gathering was smaller, more intimate, stripped of the performative elegance that Victoria had insisted upon. It felt real in a way those previous dinners never had. As we sat around the table, Lucia babbling happily in her high chair, Daniel's mother raised her glass. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "For years, I knew Victoria was treating you poorly, Anna, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my business, that you could handle it, that family harmony was more important than standing up for what was right. I was wrong. We all were," Daniel's father added, a man who'd always been kind but passive in family conflicts. "We let Victoria's cruelty continue because confronting it was uncomfortable. We chose our own comfort over your dignity, and that was inexcusable." The apologies continued around the table, cousins, aunts, uncles, all owning their complicity in Victoria's behavior. It was cathartic in a way I hadn't expected, this collective acknowledgement of harm done. "I forgive you," I said, finally meaning it. Not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me. Victoria's in prison, not because I'm vindictive, but because she and Eduardo committed actual crimes. My success isn't about revenge. It's about proving that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. I looked around the table at these people who were learning to be better, to see more clearly. We all have the chance to be better than we were yesterday. That's what I choose to focus on. Later that evening, after Lucia was in bed and the house was quiet, I sat at my desk reading Victoria's latest letter. She wrote regularly now, not asking for help or forgiveness, but simply documenting her journey toward understanding the harm she'd caused. "I've been teaching computer basics to other inmates," she wrote. "It's humbling work, admitting I know so little about something I once mocked. But there's dignity in learning, in helping others learn. I think I'm finally understanding what you knew all along, that all honest work has value." I replied to the letter, something I'd never done before. "Victoria, there's a quote I've always loved. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You can't undo the past, but you can choose who you become moving forward. That choice is available to you every single day, even in prison. Maybe especially in prison." I hesitated, then added, "When you're released, if you want to learn programming seriously, let me know. Everyone deserves a second chance at becoming who they were meant to be." Did I owe Victoria that grace? No. Would offering it change the past? No. But it might change the future, not just hers, but the future of how we all think about redemption, second chances, and the possibility of growth even after terrible mistakes. That felt aligned with the values I'd been building my career on, that people are more than their worst moments, that potential exists in unexpected places, that transformation is always possible for those willing to do the work. The following Monday, I announced a new company initiative, a reentry program for formerly incarcerated individuals with an aptitude for technology. "We have a talent shortage in this industry," I told the board, and a population of people desperate for second chances. "Let's solve both problems." There was resistance. There always is when you challenge the status quo, but the data supported me, and more importantly, it was the right thing to do. Not everyone agreed with my decision to extend grace to Victoria, to create pathways for people with criminal records. Some thought I was being naive, that I was letting personal feelings cloud business judgment. But I'd learned something important through this whole experience. When you come from nothing, when you've been underestimated and dismissed and written off, you develop a different perspective on potential. You see possibilities where others see only problems. You understand that circumstances don't define character, choices do. Today, when journalists ask me about the Maid to Boss story that's become somewhat legendary in tech circles, I always redirect the conversation. The real story, I tell them, isn't about revenge or vindication. It's about building systems where talent matters more than background, where character counts more than connections, where everyone gets a fair shot at proving their worth. That's the legacy I want to leave, not as the woman who took down her arrogant sister-in-law, but as someone who used her position to create opportunities for others. As for Victoria, I heard she's organizing basic programming classes in prison and serving as a mentor to younger inmates. Seems she finally understood that writing code all day isn't so bad after all. And maybe, just maybe, she's learning what I knew all along, that serving others, helping them become their best selves, is the highest form of leadership. Whether you call it being a maid or being a boss, it's all about service. The only question is, are you serving your own ego, or something bigger than yourself. So guys, that's the story of how being called the Maid became my greatest motivation. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because I share stories like this every week, real people, real situations, and the incredible ways life has of balancing the scales. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you prove the doubters wrong? Or maybe you're in a situation right now where people are judging you unfairly. What keeps you motivated? Drop your story below, because your experience might inspire someone else who needs to hear it. Remember, when someone tries to make you small, let it fuel your fire to become bigger than they ever imagined. Until next time, keep proving the doubters wrong.